Good morning, everyone, from sunny Charleston, South Carolina. I'm Stuart Williams, and for those of you that have been following along, this is the very first podcast in the series, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Purpose and Politics. This is the series on pimping poverty, and I am thrilled to have two friends with me that I've met over a decade ago, and we'll get into that story a little later. Mike Martin and Ian Sanchez, who are doing remarkable work. I've been asked a number of times why I'm doing this. Well, for the last 100 years, governments and NGOs have used empathy and compassion without any strategy to create palliative care societies. Initially, it was the law of unintended consequence until some people and organizations started to figure out that palliative equals profitable, and I mean really profitable. Since then, those same organizations and people have been pimping our poverty. Hence, it's time to migrate from that palliative care system to one that really does create curative societies that focus on cures and restore true participatory sovereignty for everyone. And so back to my two remarkable guests, Mike and Ian, who are both creating curative societies, respectively in Muncie, Indiana, Charleston, South Carolina, and Barbados. But before we jump into your amazing work, gents, can you take a moment to introduce yourselves? And maybe it might be fun for our listeners if we chat about how we met and the full of shit to holy shit journey that we've been on. So Ian, why don't I pass it to you first and then you hand it to Mike.
Great. Thanks again for inviting us. It's an honor to be on your first podcast. I've watched what you've done. I've saw this amazing work that's continued to go on, and hopefully continues. I would just briefly go through kind of a series of events, but I had been running a for-profit company in real estate investing before it became these reality shows. I found that seemed just the only reason to do it was to make money, and it seemed to be pretty predatory in its nature. So I remember switching to going away from that into a nonprofit organization that I ran for a number of years, and I saw the issues with that. It was a crazy setup, and I spent a lot of time asking people for money. And with boards and so forth. So then looking for that hybrid was something that was at the time called social enterprise or social entrepreneurship. And then I ran across an event that you were putting on in Kiowa called the Beyond Sustainability thing, which was intriguing. And when I showed up there, I saw a ton of people that I did not know. Most of them were not from Charleston. And when the College of Charleston asked me to sit on a board or sit on a thing, I felt, hey, the best guy for this job would be Stuart Williams that I just met. And then, of course, you went on and took it to a whole another level. Mike and I met when I was doing real estate investing, and he was actually one of my clients. We became good friends, and we both got really into this idea of doing something impactful. So I'll turn it over to Mike on that. He's been a great friend, and we've always been into self-improvement and keeping our education going.
Yeah, like Mike. Ian said, it would be a podcast in itself to tell you about the journey where Ian and I meet in life. A decade goes by. We are co-owners in a music venue together, working on one of the nonprofits that he was working with, which was a low country environmental education program. I think was what the P stood for, LEAP. One day, and it would be so long, but one day he said, I just moved back to Charleston after the business Ian and I had started 10 years ago up in Muncie. Doc Peterson had sold the building, and I just moved back to Charleston. He knew I was looking just for some gig work to keep me going between music gigs, and he said, hey, you want to come run a camera on a podcast? I'm going to interview this guy, Stuart Williams, and you'll really love what he's talking about, Mike. This is right up our alley, and he said, you'll get paid a little bit to do it, and you'll really love learning what Stuart has to say. What Stuart talked about is Stuart left, and we'll get into all this, and said, what'd you think? And it was so brilliant, right, and forward thinking. You're so many years ahead of your time. And I said, oh, that guy's full of shit. But he's cool. He's right, but he's not going to do it, And just to lead in, I get back to that real quick. I asked Stuart right before the end of it. And this guy said, he's wanting to do this in Charleston, and I'm going to start with the city of Charleston and the college of Charleston. I'm going to help put this together. And I said, well, do you know anybody in the city of Charleston? No, I'm going to just go in, and we picked Charleston because of its history, and we want to prove it can work here. I said, do you know anybody at the college of Charleston? Nope, I'm just kidding. I thought, well, this guy is out of his mind, you know. And I tell people up here where I teach the class, I said, if you think Muncie's a good old boy town, you ought to go to Charleston, South Carolina. So we'll go from there.
Well, I think that's a great introduction. I really did enjoy that podcast, which I think now was 13 years ago, if you can believe that. Time flies. And from that, I did go and knock on the door of the College of Charleston and the city of Charleston. And I, at that time, did not know anyone in Charleston. So a little bit ironic, I guess, that I now have my own day named after me in the city of Charleston after all that work. But what I thought was really wonderful, Mike, was that you said to yourself, okay, let me go and do the smell test on this. Let me go and see if he's actually going to do the work. And so you signed up for one of the free social entrepreneurship classes that I was teaching in the evenings at the college.
Yeah, the first one, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. The very first one.
Because it was almost 2 years.
And then you came back for the second, the third one.
I remember it was about 2 years because by the time you got all the programs set up, and I said, there's that guy at the college doing that. I know he's full of shit. I'm going to go see what, because I thought, well, at the end of it, he's going to try to sell us a $1,500 program that says you too could get rich in social entrepreneurship if you buy my program. And I thought I missed the sale at the end. I thought, where's the pitch? I really did.
Well, you've taken what we designed, Mike, and you've installed it in your hometown of Muncie, Indiana, and the results, which we'll get to in a second there, are equally as remarkable as they are in the other communities that we've been able to embed impact economics. But what I want to just jump into with you for a second before we get back to Ian is that way too many of our political and NGO leaders don't even look for a cure for poverty or homelessness or division. What they look for is a bigger budget to manage that decline. And I think that you faced this personally when you first took the program to Muncie. Why don't you share with our listeners who were the protagonists actually trying to prevent you from bringing that program to Muncie?
Yeah, it's it's such a multifaceted, like most things in life, right? We all wish, and this is one I think we'll get into some of it, we all wish that it was very simple, right? It was black and white, and if I just this, it fixes all of the problems that, have compounded over, like you said, 100 years. And so I just want to acknowledge that it's really not that simple, right? It's not like one person said, this and this, but that is kind of the nature of it, that there's almost this unintended consequence of the two systems couldn't work together, kind of like what Ian said, a hybrid that actually would begin to address the issues that we see on both sides, systemic problems. And so, and as you acknowledge and Ian acknowledged, it's not that there's no one doing that work that's doing great work or, trying to do the right thing. It's just that it's systemic. So often it's like the systemic reality of once you're stuck in poverty, the climb out is so long and hard that it's all but impossible in one generation. I just want to acknowledge all that. That's my experience in seeing it. But what I ran into is that there was no open-mindedness that maybe there was a better way. There was no, what if we're wrong in our approach because the results are not here? And that goes for everybody in general, right? It's, business is forced to do this immediately because you're fired and you're gone. The moment the money's up, they don't care. There's no going and trying to raise funds with, a great gala. It's when it doesn't work, and they run over you, and the next person behind you will step on your back and tell you they love you. Say, man, I really thought you'd make it. And they just step on you and keep going. And understandably is because money, right, doesn't give you time, right? Taxes don't allow that. But that's what I found, is that there wasn't an open atmosphere to even begin to say, wait a minute, what if we're doing this wrong and there's a better way? What if we could work together to achieve the results we all want? And one of the biggest problems I think that I saw was that so many of the people who found themselves in the NGO side were not used to any kind of accountability to the bottom line, because the goal was to spend all the money in the budget or they wouldn't give you more next year. And that was more important than the results, because that's just the systemic nature of this financial setup. And so you couldn't challenge it because you'd be out of money, even if you didn't like where it's going. And most of the people I found didn't like it. And what I found frustrating was when you ask people, let me ask you this, do you think things are better or worse than they were 5 years ago, right? We've been doing this for 5 years, spent X amount of money, but everybody still said, no, the problems are getting worse. Yes, there's more homelessness. There's more food insecurity. But there was no question of, well, where is the breakdown then? It was, like you said, what you call palliative care, right? Which Stuart and I were just talking before we started. My dad's in the hospital as we speak, and they're deciding, does he get palliative care or does he? And that was it, because that was the only thing they knew. And since there was no knowledge of another way, they had never ran a company that had absolute, 100% this, you either make it or don't, and if you don't, you're out. Demands on them. And so there was no desire to do that. There was a desire to keep it going long enough to hope something got better, but things aren't getting better, but nobody wanted to admit that. That was my experience. It was nothing.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, I think what you ran into was a global phenomenon with many NGOs who quite rightly, by the way, screen for systemic change. But when you actually point out to them that by inference, systemic also means changing the way that we've approached change, they actually don't want to listen. And I believe that's why you had 8 or 9 NGOs in Muncie actually go to the mayor's office and request that the city did not embrace you and bring you and the program in. And that, unfortunately, is endemic of communities around the world. I think part of it is fear. To your point, if we're going to change, what are we going to change to? But Ian, have you found similar roadblocks and hurdles along your path, maybe in Charleston and certainly Barbados?
It's amazing that people that start these organizations that are, their whole purpose to exist is to solve a community issue, are more competitive in a lot of ways than those that are just built for profit, they're supposed to be competitive. I've watched more competition between NGOs and again, like somebody's going to get my cookies for some reason, as if there were 100 NGOs doing the same work, as if we could solve that. Are we solving the problem? Are we solving the problem more? Protecting my name and my organization, and no, you can't play around. Getting what's been my mission, and when I started another organization called Grow Purpose, was to get these folks to kind of work together. The whole mission was to kind of build, hey, look, you guys are all working in little silos, but you're working together. What you showed me at the Beyond Sustainability event that you brought is that there's no shortage of money. In fact, people want to actually fund these things. They just don't have any trust, which for good reason. They don't have to measure the results. I think your good friend said it very, very eloquently about when a caterpillar is changing into a butterfly, the DNA is kind of attacks. And that's what I'm seeing right now. These new ideas come up and they may work. And so the systems that are already in place are attacking those and trying to keep it from turning into what it could be. So yes, that's been my experience. Not only here, I've watched you go through a lot. I've watched you watch your organization. I watched Impact, and I've watched the organizations, the NGOs attack it. So I witnessed that, but I've been witnessing that for quite a bit. Yeah, that's why I try to fly underneath the radar these days.
Well, our family has received over 2,000 hate emails since around 2010 for the work that we do. But you hit on a very valid point, Ian, which is there is enough money. And I, for one, am sick to death, actually, not just tired. I'm sick to death of people always pointing the finger at the residents of the top of the socioeconomic pyramid or those at the bottom. The most prevalent narrative, of course, for those that reside at the bottom about those at the top is that they're greedy, they don't care, they have all the money, they don't want to help. Well, I know for sure that that narrative is not true. And then conversely, the most perpetuated narrative at the top about those people at the bottom is that they're lazy and they don't want to work and they want handouts, etc. And I know for a fact that that is not true. And so you have to ask yourself, if those narratives are lies, which they are, why do they keep being perpetuated? Well, if you're in the middle of the socioeconomic pyramid, where most government organizations and NGOs reside, it is very easy to go to the bottom and agree with the folks there and the narrative that they're putting forward about the top. But while there, it's also fairly easy to say that you know some people at the top, and if the bottom makes you, or a segment of the bottom makes you their solution, that you will go to the top and get capitals, and it's not just money, as we all know, it's capitals with an S, and bring those capitals to the bottom to effect change. The problem is that when those people get to the top, they then agree with the narrative being perpetuated at the top about the people at the bottom, but they'll then say, well, look, those folks down there have made me their solution, so if you give me all these capitals, I'll take them back down there and fix the problem. What you don't tell anyone is that only 9% of what the top releases makes it to the bottom. And so there's that choke point, which results in a status quo, which allows those narratives to be perpetuated. So if I tell you that last year in the United States alone, almost $600 billion in financial capitals was released by the top for the bottom, and less than 10% of it made it there. And therein lies the problem, because palliative equals profit, and it was actually the leader of LAMSI, who we all know, who at an event said, these people are pimping our poverty. And that is the biggest choke point that we have, preventing us from building these curative societies. And I've come to the conclusion, by the way, that if our government representatives spend more time on our feelings than on our freedom, they aren't leading us. They're trying to sedate us. And that, to me, is a problem, because they then migrate into this sort of malaise of replacing the pursuit of victory with the performance of virtue. And again, I think that adds to this sort of downward spiral. So having said all that, Ian, take us into a bit of a deeper dive in what you're doing in Barbados and in Charleston to unlock these choke points that we're seeing.
I do see in both of these, Charleston is a great place to affect change, and same with Barbados. When you think about their history, a lot of the issues can be traced back to the history of these places. Barbados, of course, when British colonials came in, they made their money from sugarcane. They created a system that ended up coming here to Charleston. Those settlers that came from Barbados came to Charleston and then created another system, again, based on a slave plantation system. So these were two places that really became extremely wealthy from a system that was very unjust. So working on these two places to kind of come up with another system that was better, more equitable, because at the end of the day, you might say that the top really, really wins, but in the end, I would say it's a lose-lose situation. Even though you have this incredible wealth that gets tied in, it always ends in the same scenario. So trying to come up with a better scenario for everybody. And I was always searching for that. So what you brought to the table, again, I would go to the people that seem to have it together. You have a long history of working on this and changing people's mindsets towards it. And I do see now in both places, I wish I could say it's getting better. And I can't say that right now. But what I will say, what I'm doing is working with small communities that will listen and trying to keep it from the public eye so much, which it immediately gets attacked by folks that just love to get attention. And so what I'm not trying to do is get too much attention, but the idea of that building an economy that actually sustains itself, it actually generates income, but it focuses on health and environmental issues, right? And so I'm focusing on areas of health and sustainable tourism and bringing dollars into these places. I make sure we vet the people, that they have the mindset, that they really, they're into those kinds of things. Both of these places, Charleston and Barbados, tourism is their number one. So the idea of bringing in minds, people like you, to those places, exploring places that don't really get a lot of attention. They're not big resorts. A lot of people come to these places and they just stay in a resort. They never leave the resort. None of that money ever makes it back. Some of these are chain resorts. It'll never filter into the community. But bringing them to places within the community, these are folks that are very educated. They're educated. They're interested in learning about the community and supporting the community. And just by doing what they do, they're helping the community, and capital spreads in that way. But I'm doing it on a small scale with the idea of hopefully building it on a big scale instead of it's very hard to get it at the top, to get the top down thing going on. So really I'm just working with the communities themselves and trying to do it somewhat outside of the public eye.
Well, I think that that's the right strategy, because to be inclusive, it must be top down, bottom up, and middle out. And I know, Mike, you and I have spoken many, many times about the fact that the people that face the problems through their own lived experiences generally innovate the best solutions. They just don't have access to the capitals, again with an S, that they require to not only bring those solutions forward through a launch, but also to scale them. What has been your experience there in Muncie, now working with the city, working with the Great Ball State University, and working with the community in generating these incubators and managing and running these incubators, are allowing people who have faced the lived experiences to bring their solutions to life?
It's such a broad question of where to start on that answer. One is, as you know, so for the listeners, just so they kind of understand, the program that Stuart was talking about that he brought to the College of Charleston, I brought to Muncie because of Stuart. Initially, Stuart gave me a scholarship to bring the program there, because when he first started bringing the certified consultant model to scale it then nationally and internationally, I was one of those. And Stuart recognized there were some people that were coming from the bottom, and not that I have been stuck at the very bottom, right, where there's no even light coming through the cracks, right? That's not been my lived experience, but I have lived the very middle class reality of growing up in a GM Rust Belt town, and GM's gone, right? As Stuart knows, Ian knows, my grocery store and the factory that I have, that whole neighborhood has been decimated because General Motors, which was once my neighbor, is now gone, and that's a brownfield that's polluted, and they left it. And though they're required to clean it up, there's no mechanism to enforce it on a company like that. And not that they're not trying at all, but if they were really trying, it wouldn't be still a brownfield sitting there. They have the resources. The federal government, together with them, with EBA, has the resources, but it's still sitting there, an empty lot, poisoning our neighborhood. That's just the facts. I mean, it's literally a block from where I'm sitting. This isn't a theory. So on that, the positives that have happened since, so I brought that program back. I'm getting ready to teach the 7th semester. 2 days from now, we start back again. And the class is, again, completely full. And I added 5 extra seats just to make sure, and that filled up. Because we have results that are now seen in the city. About 20 businesses and nonprofits that are off the ground. as Stuart says, we try to encourage business because there's enough nonprofit work being done and the pool of resources isn't getting bigger. And so if you don't bring something new to the table, you're only taking away from the hard, underfunded work that's already being done. And so we encourage people to not do the nonprofit route unless they have to, because it doesn't make any sense to be a for-profit company. And I'll give you just a quick example. There's a group of people that put together a food rescue program, right? And there's just no for-profit model for that makes any sense. And so that's one where when we're talking, I encourage them. I said, no, I think you're right. It truly is a nonprofit idea. But if there is maybe a for-profit version that doesn't then begin to take away those resources, that's what we encourage, because that's where that input of capitals comes in. Now you have new jobs, right? New tax base, all the things that are now gone because General Motors isn't a block from where I'm having this anymore, which used to be a huge financial base for this city. But those results, and I'll just give you 3 or 4 businesses that are operating today in Muncie because of these classes. One is, much like my common market, there's a thing called a pop shop, which is about a mile away in a different neighborhood, a historically black neighborhood, that now a local person owns and operates, and that money comes in to a person that lives in that neighborhood, is staying in that neighborhood, invests in that neighborhood, versus going to a Dollar General or a Speedway and then immediately is extracted and sent to Wall Street. And none of that money stays. And the products they sell on the shelf are all a Monsanto-owned company of one form or another, or a Bayer or a Procter & Gamble, and all that money immediately goes out of Muncie and back to Wall Street. So there's one. Another one is GROW, which stands for Growing Remarkable Opportunities for Women. And this is a for-profit that does conferences and helps women who are trying to aspire to get to the C-suite and use that leadership role as a way to reach down and bring people up with them and give them the skill set needed to know they belong in the room. Another one, there's a great young woman that launched a business called the Young Entrepreneurs Launchpad, which is very much the impact idea, but she's a lady that's been in jail herself. She's a friend of mine. We've both been in the same jail in Delaware County. She was the valedictorian of her school, which I didn't know this. A young black woman, amazing person, Jasmine Taylor, who represents so well, this is what I went through, and I don't want kids in my neighborhood having to feel like they have to go deal drugs like I thought I had to do to get out of where I came from. And she ended up in prison for 5 years. And now she's back here reaching down and saying, come with me. I know the way out, girls. Don't go down this road. I've been there. And she'll tell you, she ended up having to take some charges that, really wasn't her. She made the choice to be involved in it, but she didn't make the choice to be involved in the systemic reality that she was living every day, and thought that was the only path because no one was coming. Like I said, those full of shit people at the top that say they want to help, but they weren't coming and helping her out. Right. And that's why I thought that at one point. As we all know, that's not true, but it's easy to believe that. But there's just 3 examples of businesses that are operating today from this class. Tuesday we'll start again, this exact same class I took 3 times, as Stuart said. And I'd already had a business. Ian and I had a business, but there was one thing that Stuart taught me that changed my life, and it was called cash flow break even, different than break even. But I didn't know that. Right? I was going on hope, and Ian and I know this, that if we stick in long enough, we have the tenacity, we'll overcome. But you can't overcome the wrong choice because you don't know any better. Right? If you don't know how to manage the budget and you run out of money, all the help in the world didn't help. Right? When you're out of money, you're out of money. But so doing that work, what I found is that people are very excited to have access to those capitals. They just never historically had access. And so when they do, just like you said, Stuart, they thrive quickly because they're already operating out of survival mode and poverty. Right? So there's nowhere further for them to go down. They've just never had a chance to go up. And so that's been my general experience, is that just like myself, given the opportunity, they did immediately take the best of those opportunities and begin to build, especially those who were committed to it before the opportunities show up. Some think that they can come in and all of a sudden, if they just have a good idea, somebody's going to come along and give them $1 million and all the problems will be over. And that's unfortunately not the reality. You're going to still have to prove that you are capable of managing the money. And there's a lot of choke points to that money. and all those capitals. So that's been my experience is that in taking the program here is that the results did show up just like you said they would, but no one, and this is why I think Impact has been successful. Maybe we can kind of move on to the next point from this, if that gives a little bit of idea what we do. And having been to many classes, taught, now 7 of myself, been to yours several times, including the certification trainings, what makes Impact different is we're not going in saying, here's what you need to do to fix your problem. Here's what you need to do to fix your community. We're going in and saying, what do you want to do to fix your neighborhood? Okay, let's help you make that reality come to life. And nobody does that because they don't know how. Business owners do because they have no choice. They have to start and fight for every penny, and everybody's trying to take it, not for any other reason other than it's business, right? It's cutthroat, and there's no delusion that it's not cutthroat. I ran into the same thing Ian talked about, and I once had this conversation with the CEO of a major multi-million-dollar nonprofit here who's doing great work for the health of the community. And we were just talking about the reality of these things. I said, what I have found, it's more cutthroat in this world than it is in real estate investing. And that's saying something because it's as cutthroat as it could possibly be. But there was a truth in that, right? That is just the reality that makes it hard to collaborate. But so when, like I said, given that opportunity, people did take the opportunity. I because of that, lost exactly where I was going with that for a minute. I was just trying to think about what we were talking about there on the work that I've seen. Is that people, like I said, there's this very competitive nature. And so in business, that's the case and nobody expects anything different. On the nonprofit side, there's this belief that since we're nonprofit, we're not like those people. But in reality, there's no difference. The only difference is, and I tell everybody this as we're learning, is the only difference between for-profit and nonprofit is the tax code. You can think there's a difference, but that's part of that naivety. That's part of that naivete. That's the elephant in the room nobody talks about. One has one tax model, one has another tax model.
Well, there is a tax, Mike, in the not-for-profit world. It's called an empathy tax. The empathy tax, of course, is all the donations that we provide to not-for-profits. And an empathy tax, frankly, is a protection racket wrapped up in a press release. I mean that's the bottom line, because we have allowed parts of our society to professionalize and profit from compassion to the point of absurdity. But before I jump to Ian here, I just want to, Mike, I think it's, you probably don't mind me saying that I don't think you went to college, but you are now the impact entrepreneur in residence at Ball State University. And you are also, I think, the impact entrepreneur in residence at the city of Muncie, and that you actually won the award for the most impactful citizen in Muncie last year. So bravo you. I think we just lost Mike there for a second. Looks like he's reconnecting. So Ian, having listened to Mike's experience there,
to make sure that I don't
yes,
say something that's not, I'm not the impact in residence at Ball State.
Oh, we've now lost him. Are you there, Ian?
I'm here. Yeah, I'm sure he'll come. He'll pipe back in.
He'll come back.
It's really what he touches on, and what you've touched on a lot, is not only, this kind of came up several times, it's not just capital. That doesn't get down to those levels. It's the ideas. It's a different way of thinking. I think it's been said several times. Hey, people are doing things because they don't know any better. We're going down a route, and again, working with both levels. When you're working with both levels, you can see hard work on the bottom, but not getting anywhere. I know folks 3-4 jobs. They can't even, and supporting kids and childcare and all those other things. They don't stop working from day to month. That's not lazy, but they don't have any way to get out of there. And when we talked about capital, as far as financial capital, I mean, if you just see what people spend on attack ads, political attack ads, you realize there's no shortage of financial capital in the world. Getting it to work and having the results, or the key is results, right, at the end of the day, right? Where are we going to, and how do you measure that impact? I love the name of your thing, the impact of all of this. That's kind of the thing. So I work a lot with student groups, and that's what I'm doing a lot of now, not only with with adults, but with student groups. I just came back from DC, and I'm taking student groups in different areas. But again, getting them to approach things with a different mindset. I think what you just said, this idea of profiting from empathy and touching people's heartstrings, and that's, if the problem is that's what sells. People buy into it so much. It's an uphill battle changing that mindset that you're not a victim, really.
Mm-hmm.
Or all these things that from the top and from the bottom, the ideas, fighting those things, those folks that are selling those ideas are really profiting and doing very well for it. So that countering that is a little bit difficult. If you measure the success of a post by how many likes that you got, if you say something that is true, you might get a couple. But if you make some outlandish statement that pulls on people's heartstrings, you get thousands. And that's why we're going to continue to have that issue. And face-to-face, I find, is one way to approach that.
Yeah, I think you both hit on something that I believe is a hallmark of a palliative state, and that is one that robs us of our agency and then tries to sell us back our dignity in monthly installments, right? I mean, that's what it looks like to me. Mike, I know you wanted to correct me on a statement that I made, so please go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what led the question to what Ian just said, because I agree with what you both just said. But yeah, I wanted to correct that. I'm not the impact president at Ball State. We started teaching the class at the Entrepreneurship Institute and the Entrepreneurship Center there. We did the first 6 semesters there. Last semester, we created the incubator now, where 20 businesses who actually have launched out of the class came to our Innovation Connector, which is an entrepreneur center in town that has a partnership with the city and Ball State, where you came and taught the certification class, Stuart. So now this semester, last semester, we did, instead of an Impact 101 class where you come in with your idea, we did what I called X2, which was we brought people who had completed the class and launched or were within a year of launching and brought them in and started the incubator. And now those people are going to help me this semester onboard the new people taking it. And we're doing that at the Innovation Connector, which is an entrepreneur center, a little more community connected to make sure that everybody can have access to it, and versus more university connected, which is a great, Ball State, like you said, is a great university and done such great, and they're really focused on trying to get more involved in the city. But this is where I found now that I think a good home for the incubator is, and with it working there so well, that's where we're going to begin teaching the class. And so I just want to clarify that. The city then, through this program, because they helped then fund it after COVID, when you had to kind of reinvent, okay, how are we going to do this? The world is completely different than when we started 10 years ago. The city then got involved because, as Stuart said, now what I'm doing, I can't just give it away. I have to begin to try to scale this, globally. And so the city agreed and looked at what we were doing. And so the city funded bringing Stuart here in the class. And so the city, continuing to work with us, we've been working to develop a impact officer for the city, which there's not one now. I play that role, but because of my willingness to do it, because I know how important the work is. So we're still in the process of developing that. I just want to make sure I communicated that. That way we're not saying things that are not true.
That's great. Ian, do you have something to add to that?
I'm just congratulations. I saw one of the things that we can say about Mike is that he and you is that, you said the rare case is that you said you're going to do something and then you do it, and then stick with it through thick and thin, through all the, I'm glad to see some recognition coming to both of you, because I know that there was a lot of struggle to make that happen. So congratulations.
I think I'm very much like Mike. I'm pretty irreverent. In fact, I think like most human beings, the older I get, the more irreverent I become. And I'm not looking for recognition at all. I just want to call out where the problems are. And as you both know, I don't just point out problems. I actually show up with solutions, right? And those solutions need to be embedded in place by the people that live in the communities. And those are the people that have faced the lived experiences and are best qualified to come up with the solutions. And Mike, you had mentioned earlier on the word prison, and maybe the audience would like to know that this program actually goes into prisons. And let me give you an example. We've had this program in the prison here now in Charleston for a little over 4 years. The average recidivism rate for men being released from prison in Charleston is 75% after 4 years, meaning for every 1,000 men that were released, 4 years later, 75% are back in jail, and an annual cost of $48,000 per man per year. We've had probably 400 men go through this program. Of those, I think in the low 60s, 62, 63 have been released over this just over 4 years. Not a single one of them is back in jail. The recidivism rate for those people is zero. And it's because they now have a way to legally generate their own economic vibrancy when they come out, whether that's for themselves, whether it's for their families, and of course, if enough of them do it, generate and increase economic vibrancy for their communities, because the root cause of everything that we see, whether it's homelessness, whether it's poverty, hunger, lack of access to transportation, lack of access to healthcare, education, the root cause is lack of economic vibrancy. The rest of it are all effects. So if we can help people in communities increase their economic vibrancy, and here's one main difference I want listeners to really understand. The difference between people that have lived experiences and the NGO world. Lived experience people are designing solutions for real problems that they face. This is what the NGO world does. It plays a game called Scrabble Babble. And what they do is they write down buzzwords on Scrabble-like tiles. And every 3 or 4 years, we all know there's new buzzwords du jour, right? So they write these down on Scrabble tiles and they throw them up in the air, and whatever order they land in, they create a new not-for-profit, a new study, a new conference, etc., etc. And that's the difference. That's the difference between bottom-up and scaling and middle-out and hoarding. And so when people talk about the top hoarding their capitals, it's not where it gets hoarded. It gets hoarded in the middle. Look at whether we agree with the political positions of this current administration or not, what they have done in digging into the global NGOs that are being funded by the government and where all our money is going, it's remarkable. And this is what we've been saying for so long. So I am thrilled that you two have carrying this torch and doing the most amazing work. What would you guys like to say in closing?
I'll just close off with what we need is new ideas. If we can look, these patterns keep on coming, right? Actually, not new ideas, but we need to look at the ideas to change the systems that we have right now that are clearly not working. That is going to be more difficult to combat misinformation. And so I think that if I were to close with anything, is to be skeptical of anything that you're reading or getting fed to you, because especially if it's addictive. If it gets you excited, then I would be even more. It's the boring stuff that ends up being, the truth, more than not. So to get in and see what it is, I would highly recommend that anybody watching this podcast to dig into what impact economics is all about, and to also again, if you're affecting change, we're not attacking all nonprofits. We just see a system in all of these things. I think people start these things with the heart that they really want to cause, but at the end, just like those that get into power or they get corrupted. So don't get corrupted by that stuff. Figure out the truth and then really measure your impact. I think that would be what I'll end with.
Well, Ian, thank you. And thanks for all the amazing work that you're doing. I know personally how many people and communities are being helped and risen up by this. So it's wonderful. Thank you. Mike, how would you like to finish?
If I could leave it off with, Ian and I know you, sir, also, we're kind of action oriented, results oriented people, because we realize that if you can't change people's reality, it really doesn't matter, right? We can all feel great about going in and volunteering somewhere, doing something, but if nothing ever changes, you're just going to get more of the same results. And so if we really want to make positive change that empowers, I often talk about, Stuart, this with you, and Ian and I have talked about, I did not finish college for sure. I went and quickly realized that that was not what I wanted to do, mostly economically, because it didn't make a lot of sense to go put myself in a lot of debt for a system that wasn't going to give me any real way to see an ROI on that. And as an entrepreneur, my mindset naturally went there. I think that it's hard for a lot of people because if you don't know anything else and you only thing you can do is follow the best advice you're getting. And so we've all read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or at least I know Ian and I have. If the best economic advice you ever got in your life was get a good job with benefits, you're so far behind the starting line that you don't even know it. But that's the advice I got from the most loving, awesome parents who still support me every day. And my community's got to know them because they're sitting right at that same coffee table where Stuart is set. And Ian helped fund all those years ago in the early Docs days, and got to see that with my parents. Right? This isn't an indictment of the working class, which I come from, right? Is not only do I live a block from what used to be a General Motors factory that's now a brownfield, my grandfather retired from General Motors, right? Was a UAW worker. My mom is a postal worker who's retired, right, as a postal union worker. My dad is a retired UPS man who's a Teamster retired worker, right? I mean, so I come from a strong working class union background, and those unions empowered my family for me to have healthcare growing up, for me to have, right, access to, and at that time, the middle class, I graduated high school in 1995. From 1980, to 1995, the causes were being changed and the working class didn't know it at all. The communities didn't know it. And we see it now, right? That globalization in itself is not bad. The problem was that they took the economics that were here, offshored it for cheap labor that wasn't unionized, but never took any of that 30% profit they gained back by that globalization and invested back in the community they took it from. And that didn't have to be that way. They easily could have taken 10%, retrained our workforce, and not had us all sitting here now living in poverty and in addiction when 20 years ago, this was the most owner-occupied neighborhood in my town because that General Motors factory had hundreds of good-paying jobs. So I just want to acknowledge that to me, and my lived experience was that I looked around me and said, this isn't what I want, and I'm going to go out and find it and create. And luckily, what my parents did put in me were hardcore work ethic values that they didn't tell me. I watched them for 30 years get up and go to work and do what they had to do regardless of what anything happened every day. They never didn't get up and go to work. And because they had access to good jobs at the time in a place that it mattered, they were able to provide for me, just like most of the families I knew. And I tell Stuart this as a joke one time. I told you, I thought rich meant both of your parents worked at GM, not just one of them. Because if both your parents worked at GM, you had Nikes and Guess jeans, right, and a nice car. I didn't realize that those people had no money at all. They were living paycheck to paycheck, praying that there wasn't a layoff that winter because they wouldn't be able to pay the new truck payment. Mm-hmm. But taking all that in my lived experience of coming from the working class, but meeting people like Ian and you and being willing to say what I was taught was wrong, not because they didn't love me or didn't try, they just didn't know any better. And my grandparents didn't know any better because our education system is broken. How you can get to a master's degree and you don't know anything about the American tax system. You don't know how to start an LLC. You don't know how our court system works. You don't know how our voting system actually works. How can you get to that level of education and not actually know anything about the country you run in and how it actually works? I learned that not from the education system. I learned it from being humble enough to go, guys like you know so much more than me. Teach me what I don't know. And what Ian was talking about, I think this is where I'll close it at, is I realized that victim mentality being taught to me was part of the problem. Because I had the tenacity for whatever reason, and I'm very thankful for that. I'm mostly because of the work ethic my parents taught me. I was able to say, I'm not a victim. I just don't know the information, but there are people that do. And I went out and I met, that's the first conversation Ian and I ever had. We'll have to have that. That could be a whole podcast in itself, where we met at a house he was selling. I tried to talk him into selling it to me on contract. They didn't want to do it, but Ian agreed because he felt sorry. I was another musician. His partner was pissed, asking it about this. So why did you sign that? My God, are you crazy? Why would you give? Now it's going to cause all these problems. And it did. It caused the problem because I never could come up with the money. And Ian now and I were friends, and his business partner and I weren't as much friends, but we were associates. And they had to say, Mike, I'm sorry, but you're out. And that's okay, because they were right. It wasn't their job to do that. But through all those failures and not quitting and meeting people like Stuart and Ian, I was able to get the knowledge and experience that I needed. But it came from that mindset of, I'm not a victim. The system is not designed to help me, but that's okay. I don't need that permission to thrive. And that's why I teach the class. And more than anything, what I tell them is I'm trying to teach you a mindset that can change your life. It's changed my life. And where it really changed my life is because once I had access to the people who did know, and I was humble enough to say, I don't know anything. I thought I knew a lot of things. I don't know anything about the way the world works, but I'm going to go learn it from those who do. And then I'll implement and go back down and say, come with me. I know where we're going. I've been out of this maze. Follow me. It sucks. There's moats and there's lions and there's tigers and bears. And some of us aren't going to make it out. And all I can tell you is keep running. You hear somebody fall, keep going. But when we get there, don't forget to go back and offer a hand up, right? Not a hand out, as you say, Stuart. Follow me. I know where I'm going. That's what I did with Ian. I knew when I met Ian that Ian knew a way out. And I said, I'm going to follow this guy because I know he knows where he's going. And even though sometimes the road is dark and I don't know where I'm going, I have to have somebody I trust who says, I know it's scary. Follow me. I know where I'm going. And that's the victim mentality. If we could get rid of that and we get some leaders who you've helped cultivate, who Ian's helped cultivating, I'm now trying to help cultivate, to say, look, we've been there with you. Follow us. We know where we're going. We don't need anything from you. We're not asking you for money, time. We know you don't have any of that. Come with us. We know where we're going. It's scary, but if people don't trust and believe that, they won't follow you because it's the result is too fatal if you fail. So that's what I would say is get with people that know what they're doing.
Thank you. Ian, any response?
Oh man, there's a lot, but I'll say that we've gone good on this. I think we've got a couple of really strong points. I would say one thing that I meant to add too, the extractive. I was talking to people, different thing, but this idea of extracting, you might think you're winning. At the end of the day, you're not. It always ends in the end. So the idea of keeping things going is not just altruistic, but for those that have the haves, it's important that you have that you keep things going. And so that's one last thing I'd like to add to that. What Mike says is again, we have a deep history.
Thank you. Well, I think you'll both be pleased to hear then that in this series, in the Pimping Poverty series, we are going to be taking a much deeper dive with people who are only focused on early childhood education, or only focused on vets, or only focused on the prison system. So that is coming. And then in addition to that, we have a second series called Solutions Unknown. And that's where we are going around the world into forgotten and marginalized and underserved community segments to highlight the remarkable solutions that people with those lived experiences are bringing to life. And so that other people, to your point, Mike, can help them not only launch, but scale those solutions in similar communities around the world. I want to leave our listeners today with what I think is the most classic example that I have ever seen personally of what we've been speaking about. I was asked to speak at a not-for-profit event here in Charleston, and I did tell the organizers that all the research that my graduate students at the College of Charleston had done on the not-for-profit industry clearly showed, as Ian, you mentioned earlier, there are 50 to 51% of not-for-profits in this world that need to be supported. Now imagine if they got all the assets and donations that the other 50% that don't do anything were having. I think that would make the world a better place. So we're not here bashing on all not-for-profits. I want to put that out there. But I did speak to the organizers and told them that I probably would not be a welcome speaker. And the organizer asked me to still speak because he felt that the people in his organization, and there were about 60 or 70 not-for-profits in this sort of organization, needed to hear both sides of the coin. So I agreed to speak. And I brought with me Reverend King, who you all know, and some of her folks from the community that she lives in, and the wonderful, wonderful work she's doing with the Pink House. And I brought them there as exemplars of what I was talking about. Of course, and it probably wouldn't surprise everybody listening that 90% of the executive directors of these 70 or so not-for-profits were white women, huge hearts, wanting to try and make a difference. I was halfway through giving my 20, 30-minute presentation. And a woman jumped up and she pointed to me and screamed out, "You're the problem." And I said, "Okay, well, that's fine. That's your opinion. Would you like to tell me why?" And she said to me in a very loud voice, "How dare you? How dare you have the audacity?" And at that time, she pointed to Reverend King, and her African-American colleagues there. "How dare you have the audacity to tell those people that they can fix their own problems? They can't, and that's why we're all here." And all I did was put my hands up and say, "I rest my case. I don't have to say another word." Ian, Mike, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for all the incredible work you're doing and the difference you're making in the lives of so many people in the communities that you care about. If I or any of our listeners can help, I will, if you want me, put your contact details up in the notes of the podcast. But I want to thank you very, very much. And I look forward to